The evening started like any other Friday night at the Grandview Manor, the kind of place where everything sparkled a little too much and cost a little too much. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, and the marble floors were so polished you could practically see your reflection staring back at you. This wasn't the sort of place regular folks wandered into. This was where the wealthy came to remind themselves just how wealthy they were. Maya Rodriguez smoothed down her black vest for what felt like the 100th time that evening. She'd been working at Grandview Manor for almost 2 years now, and she still got a little nervous before the big events. Tonight was the annual Riverside Charity Gala, which meant the richest people in the city would be gathering to write checks, make speeches, and pat themselves on the back for being so generous. Maya didn't mean to sound bitter about it. Some of them really did care. But after serving champagne and appetizers to hundreds of wealthy guests over the years, she'd learned to spot the difference between those who genuinely wanted to help and those who just wanted to be seen helping. She checked her watch. 6:30. Guests would start arriving in half an hour, and there was still so much to do. The other servers were bustling around the grand ballroom, making final adjustments to the table settings and ensuring every wine glass was spotless. Maya grabbed a tray of champagne flutes from the service station and made her way to her assigned section near the main entrance. That's where they always put her. She had a warm smile and a way of making people feel welcome, her manager said. What he really meant was that she was good at dealing with demanding guests without losing her cool. The ballroom really did look beautiful tonight, Maya had to admit. White roses and orchids decorated every table, their petals so perfect they almost looked fake. Soft golden light bathed everything in a warm glow, and a string quartet played quietly in the corner. Through the tall windows you could see the city lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set over the river. It was the kind of scene you'd see in a movie about rich people's lives. Maya's feet already hurt and the night hadn't even started yet. She'd been on campus all morning for her classes at Riverside Community College, then rushed home to check on her younger brother Diego before heading to work. Diego was 17, a high school senior, and lately he'd been staying out too late with friends she didn't quite trust. Being his guardian at 28 wasn't what she'd planned for her life, but when their parents died in a car accident 6 years ago, there wasn't really a choice. Someone had to take care of him, and she was all he had. The money from this job kept them afloat. Barely. The rent on their small apartment took most of her paycheck, and Diego needed new shoes again because teenagers apparently never stopped growing. Community college was all she could afford, taking 1 or 2 classes each semester whenever she'd saved enough. At this rate, she'd have her associate degree by the time she was 35. If she was lucky, but she couldn't think about that now. The first guests were arriving, and Maya put on her professional smile. The one that didn't quite reach her eyes but looked convincing enough from a distance. They came in waves, women in gowns that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. Men in perfectly tailored suits, their watches catching the light as they gestured while talking. The air filled with the scent of expensive perfume and cologne, mixed with the aroma of the gourmet appetizers being passed around. Maya moved through the crowd with practiced ease, offering champagne, clearing empty glasses, always seeming to appear exactly when needed, and disappear just as quickly. Most guests barely looked at her. She was part of the scenery, like the flowers or the chandeliers. Occasionally someone would thank her, and those small moments of acknowledgement felt surprisingly good. But mostly she was invisible, and honestly that was easier. Being invisible meant not being noticed when you were tired, when your smile slipped a little, when you had to stand in the corner for a moment and close your eyes because your feet hurt so badly. Around 7:30 the ballroom was packed. The noise level had risen to that particular pitch of wealthy people all trying to talk over each other while pretending they weren't. Maya was refilling champagne glasses at table 12 when she heard the voice, "This wine is warm." Completely unacceptable. The words cut through the ambient chatter, loud and sharp with irritation. Maya turned to see a man in his mid-50s holding up a wine glass like it had personally offended him. He had silver hair swept back from his face, a deep tan that probably came from somewhere tropical and expensive, and the kind of watch that cost more than a car. Everything about him screamed money and the absolute certainty that money meant he deserved everyone's immediate attention. Richard Westbrook. Maya recognized him from previous events. He owned half the commercial real estate in the city, or so she'd heard the other servers say. He was also known for being Difficult, demanding, the kind of guest who sent food back 3 times and complained about everything while tipping poorly. Maya approached his table with her professional smile firmly in place. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get you a fresh glass right away." "You know what the problem is with places like this?" Richard said, not really asking her but announcing it to his entire table. 6 other guests sat with him, all looking slightly uncomfortable. "They hire people who don't understand quality. This wine should be served at precisely 55 degrees. Any idiot knows that." Maya felt her cheeks warm but kept her voice steady and polite. "You're absolutely right, sir. I'll speak with our sommelier immediately and ensure your next glass is perfect." She reached for his glass, but Richard pulled it back, clearly not finished making his point. "Do you even know what a sommelier is?" The question hung in the air. At the surrounding tables, conversations had started to quiet. People were beginning to notice the commotion. Maya could feel eyes turning toward them, though most guests tried to be discreet about their staring. "Yes, sir," Maya said quietly. "The wine expert. I'll get them right now." "The wine expert," Richard repeated, mimicking her tone in a way that made it sound childish. He looked around his table, seeming to enjoy having an audience. "These people serve us $200 bottles of wine, and they can barely pronounce sommelier. No wonder the service industry is in such a state." One of the women at his table, wearing a navy blue gown with diamonds at her throat, touched Richard's arm gently. "Richard, perhaps we could just—" "No, Helen, this is important," Richard interrupted. "We pay good money for these events. We deserve quality service. From people who understand quality. Not from—" He gestured vaguely at Maya in a way that made her feel very small. "Well, you know what I mean." Maya did know what he meant. She knew exactly what he meant. And it had nothing to do with warm wine. Her hands had started to tremble slightly, so she clasped them behind her back where no one could see. She'd dealt with difficult guests before. Rude ones, demanding ones. But something about the way Richard was looking at her, the way he'd raised his voice so others would hear, the way he was using her as entertainment for his table, it felt different. More deliberate, crueler. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Maya said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "Let me correct this immediately." She turned to leave, desperate to escape to the kitchen where she could take a breath and maybe splash some cold water on her face. But Richard apparently wasn't done. "Wait," he called after her, loud enough that now everyone in the nearby area was definitely listening. "I'm curious about something. What's your background? Education?" Maya stopped. She didn't want to turn around, didn't want to engage, but years of customer service training had conditioned her to respond when guests spoke to her. She turned back slowly. "I'm attending Riverside Community College, sir." Richard leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at his lips. Not a kind smile. "Community college? How quaint. And what are you studying?" "Let me guess. Hospitality management?" "General studies right now, sir." "I'm still deciding on a major." "General studies," Richard repeated again in that mocking tone. "Undecided." "That figures. You see, everyone, this is what's wrong with society today. No direction, no ambition, no sense of excellence. People just drift through life, taking whatever job they can get, serving wine they know nothing about to people they— "Richard, that's enough." The voice came from a woman at a nearby table. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind eyes behind designer glasses. Maya had seen her at other events. Eleanor Chen, if she remembered correctly, some kind of philanthropist who ran a foundation. But Richard was on a roll now, emboldened by the champagne he'd been drinking and the attention he was receiving. "Is it though, Eleanor? Is it really enough? We wonder why standards are declining, why excellence is becoming rare, and yet we don't want to acknowledge the obvious. Some people are cut out for certain roles in life, and that's just reality. Not everyone can be exceptional. Most people are meant to serve, not lead, to follow, not create." The silence in that part of the ballroom was now absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to be playing more quietly, as if sensing the tension. Maya felt frozen in place, her face burning with humiliation. Part of her wanted to walk away with whatever dignity she had left. But another part of her, the part that had survived her parents' death, that had raised a teenage brother while working and going to school, that had sacrificed everything to keep them afloat, that part was angry. Before she could decide what to do, her manager appeared at her elbow. Tom was a nervous man in his 40s who hated confrontation and loved keeping wealthy guests happy. In that order. "Is everything all right here?" Tom asked, his voice a little too bright, a little too eager to smooth things over. "The wine was warm," Richard said, suddenly all charm now that management had arrived. "I was just explaining to your server that attention to detail matters in establishments like this." Tom nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, absolutely. Maya, why don't you head to the kitchen for a moment? I'll personally ensure Mr. Westbrook receives a perfect glass of wine." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked away as quickly as she could without running. She could feel the eyes following her, could imagine the whispers starting as soon as she was out of earshot. Poor girl, how embarrassing. Did you hear what he said? Some people just don't belong in places like this. In the kitchen, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her heart was pounding and her hands were still shaking. One of the other servers, a woman named Jessica, who'd worked at Grandview Manor for 5 years, came over with a concerned look. "Hey, you okay? We heard what happened out there. That guy's a complete jerk." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. If she opened her mouth, she might cry, and she absolutely would not give Richard Westbrook that satisfaction. "He does this at every event," Jessica continued, lowering her voice. "Finds someone on staff to pick on. Makes himself feel important by making someone else feel small. Last month it was Carlos from catering. The month before that it was one of the coat check girls. He's just a bully in an expensive suit." Knowing she wasn't the first person Richard had humiliated should have made Maya feel better. Somehow it made her feel worse. How many people had he done this to? How many servers, clerks, assistants, drivers had suffered his cruelty while everyone else just watched and did nothing? Tom stuck his head into the kitchen. "Maya, you good to go back out?" "We're short-handed tonight." Of course they were. They were always short-handed because the manor didn't want to pay for adequate staffing. And of course she had to go back out there. Because she needed this job. Because Diego needed new shoes and their rent was due next week and she had tuition to pay for her single class next semester. "Yeah, I'm fine," Maya said, straightening up and smoothing her vest again. "I'm good," but she wasn't good. As she pushed back through the doors into the ballroom, carrying a fresh tray of appetizers, she felt different. Smaller somehow, visible in a way she'd never wanted to be. She could see some guests glancing at her, then quickly looking away. Others pretended nothing had happened, which somehow felt worse than the staring. Richard was holding court at his table, laughing loudly at something one of his companions had said. He'd already forgotten about her. To him, she'd been entertainment for 5 minutes. A way to demonstrate his superiority. She'd be completely forgotten by the time he left tonight. Maya moved through her section mechanically, doing her job, smiling when appropriate, thanking guests when they thanked her. But inside, something had shifted. She kept thinking about what Richard had said. That some people were meant to serve. That not everyone could be exceptional. That excellence was becoming rare. He didn't know anything about her. He didn't know about the scholarship she'd been offered 6 years ago. The full ride to the Mason Conservatory of Music, one of the best music schools in the country. He didn't know about her grandmother's piano, the one she'd learned on, spending hours every day after school while other kids played outside. He didn't know about the talent her teachers said was remarkable, maybe even extraordinary. He didn't know that she'd been the best young pianist in the entire state when she was 16 years old. He didn't know that she'd turned down that scholarship when her parents died because someone had to take care of Diego, that she'd made a choice to serve, as Richard put it, not because she wasn't exceptional, but because being Diego's sister mattered more than being an exceptional pianist. The evening wore on. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. Everyone applauded at the appropriate moments. Maya kept working, kept smiling, kept being invisible to most people, and a target of pity for the few who'd witnessed her humiliation. She was clearing dessert plates when she heard Tom's voice over the sound system, slightly panicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room quieted. Tom stood near the small stage area where the string quartet had been playing during dinner. He looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar. "I'm afraid we have a slight situation. Our pianist for this evening has encountered a family emergency and won't be able to perform. We were hoping to have live piano music during the charity auction, but it seems that won't be possible tonight." A murmur ran through the crowd. The live music was a tradition at these events, something people looked forward to. Eleanor Chen stood up from her table near the front. "Surely someone here can play," she asked, looking around the room. In a gathering this size, there must be someone with musical talent. A few awkward laughs rippled through the crowd, but no one volunteered. These were executives and investors and philanthropists. They paid other people to play piano for them. And then Richard's voice rang out, dripping with false sweetness. "Perhaps our waitress has hidden talents. She seems like a woman of many skills." The laughter that followed was uncomfortable. Most people didn't find it funny, but a few chuckled anyway, the way people do when someone powerful makes a joke at someone powerless's expense. Maya stopped moving. The dessert plates in her hand suddenly felt very heavy. Every eye in the room seemed to be on her again, and this time there was curiosity mixed with the pity. Some guests looked away, embarrassed on her behalf. Others watched, waiting to see what would happen next. This was her moment to stay invisible, to set down the plates and walk back to the kitchen and let Tom figure out his pianist problem. To be sensible, to be practical, to remember that she had bills to pay and a brother who depended on her and absolutely no room in her life for pride or drama or doing anything that might risk this job she desperately needed. But Maya found herself setting down the plates very carefully on the nearest table, found herself looking across the ballroom to where Richard sat, still smirking, still so certain of his superiority, still so absolutely sure that he knew who she was and what she was capable of. He had no idea. And suddenly, more than anything, Maya wanted to show him exactly how wrong he was. The walk from the service area to the piano felt like it took forever and no time at all. Maya was aware of every single step, every eye following her movement across the ballroom. The room had gone quiet in that particular way that meant everyone was watching but pretending not to. Conversations continued in whispers. Glasses clinked softly. But the attention was all on her. Her heart hammered in her chest so hard she was sure people could see it. What was she doing? This was insane. She hadn't played piano in front of anyone in years, not since before her parents died. Not since she'd packed away that part of her life like an old photograph you couldn't bear to look at anymore. The grand piano sat on a raised platform near the windows, its black surface reflecting the chandelier light like dark water. It was beautiful. A Steinway, if she wasn't mistaken. The kind of instrument she used to dream about playing. The kind her grandmother's old upright piano couldn't even come close to matching. Tom intercepted her halfway across the room, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He kept his voice low, urgent. "Maya, what are you doing?" "You don't have to do this. That guy was just being a jerk. Let me handle it." "I can play," Maya said simply. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "But you don't have to prove anything to these people, especially not to him." Tom glanced over at Richard, who was watching with an amused smile, like this was the best entertainment he'd had in months. Maya looked at her manager. Tom was a decent guy, really. Spineless when it came to standing up to wealthy guests, sure. But he'd always been fair to her, given her the good shifts. Let her adjust her schedule around her classes. He meant well. "I know I don't have to," she said, "but I want to." Before Tom could argue further, Eleanor Chen appeared beside them. Up close, the older woman had a warm presence despite her obvious wealth and status. Her eyes were sharp and kind at the same time, like she saw more than most people and actually cared about what she saw. "Can you really play, dear?" Eleanor asked gently. There was no mockery in her voice, no challenge. Just honest curiosity. Maya nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I can." Eleanor smiled and it reached her eyes. "Then I would very much like to hear you play. Don't let small-minded people make you smaller than you are." For a long moment, maybe 5 seconds that felt like an eternity, nobody moved. The silence was complete. Absolute. Everyone seemed afraid to break whatever spell had been cast. And then, from somewhere near the back, someone started clapping. Just one person, slow, deliberate claps. Then another person joined in. And another. And suddenly the entire ballroom erupted in applause like nothing Maya had ever heard. People weren't just clapping politely the way they did at these events for speeches and announcements. They were on their feet. Standing ovation, shouting, "Brava!" The applause rolled over Maya like a wave, and she opened her eyes, suddenly remembering where she was. The ballroom came crashing back into focus. Hundreds of faces all looking at her, but looking differently than before. Not with pity or curiosity or indifference, with respect. with amazement, with recognition that they'd just witnessed something special. Maya stood up slowly, uncertain what to do. She'd never played for an audience like this. Her recitals had been in small concert halls with a few dozen people, mostly other students' families. This was overwhelming. All these successful, wealthy, powerful people, and they were applauding her, not because she'd served them well or made their evening convenient. Because of her talent, her skill, her artistry. She gave a small, awkward bow. The applause somehow got louder. Eleanor Chen was on her feet, clapping with her hands held high, tears still streaming down her face. Tom looked like he might pass out from shock. Jessica was jumping up and down near the kitchen doors, whooping and cheering, and Richard just sat there, not clapping, not moving, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shame maybe, or anger, or just the uncomfortable realization that he'd been completely, utterly, embarrassingly wrong. Maya descended from the platform on shaky legs. She felt like she might cry or laugh or collapse. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was draining away, leaving her lightheaded and unsteady. But as she stepped down, Eleanor Chen was there, reaching for her hands. The older woman's grip was surprisingly strong. "That was extraordinary," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely extraordinary. Where did you train?" Before Maya could answer, other guests began crowding around. Everyone wanted to talk to her suddenly, to tell her how moved they were, to ask questions. A woman introduced herself as the director of the city symphony. A man pressed his business card into her hand, saying something about concert opportunities. Another guest asked if she gave private lessons. It was too much. Too fast. Maya's head was spinning. These same people who'd either ignored her or pitied her 10 minutes ago now wanted pieces of her, wanted to claim some connection to this unexpected talent they'd discovered. Through the crowd, over people's shoulders, she could see Richard standing now. He wasn't approaching, wasn't congratulating her. He was edging toward the exit, trying to leave quietly while everyone was distracted, trying to slip away from the uncomfortable situation he'd created. But Eleanor saw him too, and Eleanor, Maya was beginning to realize, wasn't the type of woman who let things slide. "Richard," Eleanor called out, her voice cutting through the excited chatter. "Richard Westbrook, don't you dare leave." Richard froze, his hand on the back of his chair. The crowd quieted slightly, people sensing something interesting was about to happen. Eleanor hadn't let go of Maya's hands. She turned to address the room, her voice clear and commanding despite her age. "I think someone owes this young woman an apology. Don't you agree?" The ballroom went silent again, but this time the silence had sharp edges. This wasn't the odd silence of listening to beautiful music. This was the tense silence of watching someone powerful about to be held accountable. All eyes turned to Richard, and there was absolutely nowhere for him to hide. Richard's face went through several shades of red before settling on something close to purple. He stood there with his hand still on the chair, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd walked into a trap. The entire ballroom was watching him now, waiting. The same people who'd laughed at his jokes earlier in the evening. The same people who'd nodded along when he'd complained about service and standards and excellence. Now they were all staring at him with very different expressions on their faces. Eleanor hadn't moved. She still held Maya's hands in hers, standing there like a shield between the young woman and the man who'd tried to tear her down. And Eleanor Chen wasn't someone you could ignore or dismiss. She'd been a fixture in the city's philanthropic community for decades. Her foundation had funded hospitals, schools, arts programs. When Eleanor spoke, people listened, even people as wealthy and arrogant as Richard Westbrook. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but somehow carrying across the entire room. "We're waiting, Richard." Richard cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, looked anywhere except at Maya. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Eleanor. I merely commented on the service earlier. That's hardly—" "You humiliated this young woman in front of a room full of people," Eleanor interrupted, and there was steel in her voice now. "You mocked her education. You suggested she was somehow less than the rest of us. You made assumptions about her worth based on her job.
And now we've all seen how wrong you were."
"So yes, I expect you to apologize. Actually, we all do." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. People nodded. A few voiced their support out loud. Richard looked around at the faces surrounding him and seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time in his life, that his money and status weren't going to save him from this moment. Helen, the woman in the navy dress who'd been sitting at Richard's table, stood up. Eleanor's right, Richard. What you did was cruel. We all sat there and watched it happen, and frankly, I'm ashamed we didn't say something sooner. Others at Richard's table nodded. One by one, they were distancing themselves from him. Reading the room, realizing that being associated with Richard right now was not a good look. That's how it worked with people like this, Maya realized. They'd laughed at his jokes and enjoyed his company when he was on top. But the moment he stumbled, the moment public opinion turned against him, they scattered like birds. Richard's jaw clenched. He was a man used to being in control, used to commanding respect and attention. This reversal, this sudden shift where he was the one being judged, clearly didn't sit well with him. For a moment, Maya thought he might just walk out, refuse to apologize, storm off into the night with whatever pride he had left. But he didn't. Maybe because leaving would make things worse. Maybe because Eleanor's influence in this city meant crossing her was a bad idea. Maybe because somewhere deep down, underneath all that arrogance and entitlement, there was a tiny shred of decency that recognized he'd gone too far. He turned slowly to face Maya. His expression was tight, uncomfortable. The words seemed to physically pain him as he forced them out. I apologize for my earlier comments. They were inappropriate. The apology hung in the air, flat and hollow. It was the kind of non-apology people gave when they were forced to. When they were sorry they got caught, but not sorry for what they did. Maya could see it in his eyes. He wasn't actually sorry. He was embarrassed. Angry even. Angry at her for putting him in this position. For being talented when she was supposed to be ordinary. For proving him wrong in the most public way possible. Eleanor clearly heard the emptiness in his words too. She raised an eyebrow. That's it? That's all you have to say? Richard's face tightened even more. What else would you like me to say, Eleanor? I've apologized. I think we can all move past this now and get back to enjoying the evening. Move past this, Eleanor repeated slowly, as if tasting the words and finding them bitter. She finally released Maya's hands and took a step toward Richard. Despite being a foot shorter and 30 years older, Eleanor somehow seemed larger than him in that moment. You want to move past humiliating someone, questioning their worth, and being proven spectacularly wrong. All in the span of an hour. How convenient for you. The crowd was fully invested now. This was better than any entertainment they'd planned for the evening. Some people had their phones out again. Though whether they were recording or just ready to live tweet this drama, Maya couldn't tell. Richard, Eleanor continued, her voice softer now but no less powerful. I've known you for 20 years. I've watched you build your empire, make your fortune. And somewhere along the way you forgot something important. Money doesn't make you better than anyone else. It just makes you richer. That young woman you mocked? She gestured to Maya. She has more talent in one finger than most of us have in our entire bodies. She's working her way through school, supporting her family, and somehow maintaining grace and dignity even when people like you try to strip it from her. That's excellence. That's character. Those are the qualities that actually matter. Several people in the crowd clapped, not the thunderous applause from earlier, but slow, deliberate claps of agreement. Richard looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. But Eleanor wasn't finished. You want to know what I think? I think you're threatened by people like her. Young people working their way up, earning everything they have. Because you inherited most of your seed money from your father, didn't you, Richard? You talk about excellence and merit, but you started on third base and convinced yourself you hit a triple. That landed like a bomb. Several people gasped. Helen covered her mouth with her hand. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. You didn't call out someone's privilege that directly at events like this. It was an unspoken rule. Everyone here had some advantage, whether inherited wealth or family connections or good old-fashioned luck. You didn't point it out. You certainly didn't weaponize it. But Eleanor had just broken that rule, and she'd done it with surgical precision. Richard's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous, he snapped. I don't have to stand here and be lectured like a child. I made a comment about service quality, that's all. This witch hunt is completely out of proportion to... You called her simple. Maya's own voice surprised her. She hadn't meant to speak. The words just came out quiet but clear. Everyone turned to look at her. You said I didn't understand quality, that I had no direction, no ambition. You said some people are meant to serve and not to lead. That's what you said. She wasn't angry. That's what surprised her most. She thought she'd be furious, but she wasn't. She just felt tired. Tired of people like Richard. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of having to prove her worth to people who'd made up their minds about her based on her uniform. I work 40 hours a week at this job, Maya continued, and now she couldn't seem to stop. All the words she'd swallowed earlier came pouring out. I take 2 classes a semester when I can afford it. I take care of my 17-year-old brother. I make sure he eats, does his homework, doesn't get into trouble. I pay rent, utilities, groceries, his school expenses. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. I cut my own hair because I can't afford a salon. I'm doing everything I can just to survive, and I do it without complaining because that's what you do when people depend on you. The ballroom was absolutely silent now. Even Eleanor had gone, still listening. You don't know anything about me, Maya said, looking directly at Richard. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've given up. You saw a waitress and decided that's all I was, all I could be, and you felt entitled to treat me like I was less than human because of it. That's not about service quality or standards or excellence, that's just cruelty. Richard opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time all evening, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. I accept your apology, Maya said quietly, but I don't think you mean it. I think you're sorry you got caught. Sorry everyone saw who you really are, but that's okay. I don't need you to mean it. I just need you to know that you were wrong about me. Completely wrong. And maybe next time, you'll think twice before you decide someone's value based on how they earn their paycheck. She turned away from him then, done with the conversation, done with Richard Westbrook entirely. He wasn't worth any more of her time or energy. Eleanor reached out and squeezed Maya's arm gently. There were tears in the older woman's eyes again, but she was smiling. Beautifully said, my dear. Beautifully said. Tom appeared at Maya's elbow, looking concerned and completely overwhelmed. Maya, why don't you take a break? Head to the back for a while. I think you've earned it. For once, Maya agreed with him. She nodded and started making her way through the crowd. People parted to let her pass, and several reached out to touch her arm or shoulder as she went by, offering support, solidarity. A man she didn't recognize pressed something into her hand, a business card she realized later. A woman whispered thank you as Maya passed, though Maya wasn't sure what she was being thanked for. As she neared the kitchen doors, Jessica pulled her into a tight hug. You're my hero, Jessica whispered fiercely. I've been working here 5 years and I've wanted to say something like that to guests like him 1,000 times, but I never had the guts. You're amazing. Maya hugged her back, feeling the adrenaline finally starting to fade. Her hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. The reality of what she'd just done was starting to sink in. She'd played piano in front of hundreds of people. She'd confronted a wealthy, powerful man. She'd said things that servers weren't supposed to say, things that could get her fired. Tom's not going to fire you, Jessica said, reading her mind. Did you see his face? He looked proud. Plus, after, tonight you're probably the most famous waitress in the city. Firing you would be terrible PR. Maya managed a weak laugh. Famous. Right. That wasn't terrifying at all. In the kitchen, she collapsed into a chair in the staff break area. Her feet hurt. Her head hurt. Her heart was racing. But underneath all of that, there was something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Stood up for herself. Played music again after years of silence. Refused to be made small by someone who thought his money made him better than her. Mr. Patterson came through the doors carrying a glass of water. He handed it to her without a word, just nodded in that solemn way of his. Maya drank gratefully, realizing how thirsty she was. Your grandmother would be proud, Mr. Patterson said softly. Rosa was always talking about you, about how talented you were, how special. She'd be proud you let people see that tonight. Maya's eyes welled up. She'd forgotten that Mr. Patterson had known her grandmother. They'd worked together years ago before Abuela Rosa retired, before she got sick, before she died and took so much of Maya's music with her. "Thank you," Maya whispered. The door swung open again, and Tom stuck his head in. "Maya, there's someone who wants to talk to you, if you're up for it." Maya took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to say no, wanted to hide in the kitchen for the rest of the night and process everything that had happened. But she nodded and stood up, smoothing down her vest once more out of habit. She expected to see Eleanor waiting in the hallway, or maybe one of the other guests who'd been so enthusiastic about her playing. Instead, she found a younger woman, maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and an expensive camera around her neck. "Hi," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Veronica Ishii. I'm a journalist with the Tribune. I cover arts and culture. I was here tonight covering the charity gala, but honestly, your performance was the real story. Would you be willing to talk to me? Just for a few minutes?" A journalist. Of course. Maya should have known. In the age of social media and viral videos, nothing stayed private. By tomorrow morning, her impromptu performance would probably be all over the internet. People would share it, comment on it, dissect it. Her life was about to become very, very complicated. "I don't know," Maya said hesitantly. "I'm not really comfortable with—" "I understand," Veronica interrupted gently. "But here's the thing. The story is already out there. Multiple people recorded your performance. It's probably already being uploaded as we speak. You can't stop that. But you can control the narrative. You can tell your side. Make sure people understand the full context." Maya bit her lip, thinking. Veronica had a point. If the story was going to spread anyway, maybe it was better to have some say in how it was told. "Okay," Maya said finally. "But not here, and not tonight. I need some time to process all of this." Veronica smiled and pulled out another business card. "Fair enough. Here's my contact info. Call me when you're ready. And Maya, what you did tonight was brave. Not just the piano playing. The other part. Standing up for yourself. A lot of people needed to see that." After Veronica left, Maya returned to the kitchen. She could hear the party continuing in the ballroom. Music playing again. The string quartet had resumed. Conversations and laughter. Life moving on like it always did. But Maya knew that for her, nothing would ever be quite the same. Tom appeared in the doorway one more time. "Eleanor Chen is asking for you. She says it's important. Are you okay to talk to her?" Maya nodded. Eleanor was the one person she actually wanted to talk to. The woman who'd stood up for her when no one else would. Who'd forced Richard to apologize even if he didn't mean it. Who'd seen Maya as a person worth defending. Eleanor was waiting in one of the smaller conference rooms off the main ballroom. She'd claimed a quiet space away from the crowd, and she stood by the window looking out at the city lights. When Maya entered, Eleanor turned and smiled warmly. "Come in, dear. Sit down. We need to talk." Maya sat, suddenly nervous. Eleanor had that effect on people, not because she was intimidating exactly. More because she radiated the kind of power that came from decades of accomplishment and influence. "First," Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from Maya, "I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner, when Richard was berating you earlier. I sat there and said nothing, and that was wrong of me. I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize," Maya said quickly. "You stood up for me when it mattered." "But I should have done it sooner," Eleanor insisted. "I've been thinking about that. How many times I've witnessed behavior like Richard's and stayed silent. How complicit that makes me. Tonight was a wake-up call for me too, Maya, so thank you for that." Maya didn't know what to say to that. The idea that she'd taught Eleanor Chen something, see,